Chapter 15 of The Man with the Red Beard by David Whitelaw. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne. Chapter 15. The Papers in the Rainpipe. He was seated at his breakfast, and he jumped from his chair as though he had been on springs as I entered. I had followed hard upon the heels of his man, and so took my friend completely by surprise. I, too, was perhaps nearly as surprised as he, for in the mirror that hung on the wall behind him in apparition, gaunt and in travel-stained uniform, seemed to advance across the room with outstretched hand to meet me. There had been no such luxuries as looking-glasses in the cell I had so lately left, and 6 months of tortured hardships, such as I had experienced, go far to age and alter a man. I am sure that in the emaciated, bearded figure, clad in the ill-fitting warder's coat, I did not at first recognize the well-fed Samuel Mannering, who had but 6 months past stood in Dick Behrman's room. And Dick, dear old fellow, did not seem to be able to make up his bewildered mind what to do first, whether to shake hands with me or fly to the sideboard and mix me a brandy and soda. It did not take him long to do both. Within the space of a very few minutes I was seated, clad in a barbaric dressing-gown, at the table, pouring out into my host's ear, as well as I was able to remember them, the things which had befallen me since I had last seen him. It is hard for me to write of the feelings I experienced as I sat before the cut glass and silver of Dick's breakfast table. The well-found comfort of it all, the cosy furnishings, the summer sunlight which glanced in at the long windows, did more, I think, to bring my physical strength back to me than the food itself, which I was somewhat greedily, I am afraid, devouring. At the same time I do not wish to belittle the latter. Devilled kidneys and crisp rolls, together with fragrant coffee, had been strangers to my lips for far too long a day for me to speak of them with anything but the profoundest respect. Dick listened to my story with the keenest interest. Things had, he said, been a deal quieter in Moscow during the last few months. There had been many ugly massacres, however, details of which he told me, before law and order, as those things are known in the land of the Tsar, had been established. The ending of the war with Japan, too, had given the country something other than revolt to think about, but this was counterbalanced by the return of so many men with tales of their sufferings in Manchuria, men who, having no work to go to, infested the cafes and street corners, drinking and telling stories to willing listeners of the excesses of the exalted and the pilfering of stores by those in authority. The ranks of the revolutionaries were greatly increased by these malcontents, and, Dick thought, although comparative quiet now reigned, they were only waiting for a man to lead them to break forth afresh. Then, becoming more personal, Behrman went on to tell me a few very interesting details about myself, and as I listened I scored up further heavy items on my account with Felix Marazeff. Winson, I learnt, had come to Moscow in a fine state, moving heaven and earth and the Russian authorities to find news of one Samuel Mannering, who had arrived in the city of Moscow at the end of December, and of whom, after one letter, all trace had disappeared. His well-meant blustering way had been met with the most deadly courtesy by the officials. He had been driven from pillar to post, from one department to another, until eventually he had reached my little brown-eyed friend, Baron Costo. This gentleman, Dick told me, and another gentleman who was with him when they visited the prison, were perhaps more polite than any of the previous officials. The other gentleman, who could speak English and acted as interpreter, told Winson of a raid which the police had recently made on a very nest of Nihilists, and in which many, how many it was impossible to say, were killed. It was difficult, he said, in such matters, to winnow the chaff from the grain, to tell the innocent from the guilty. Anyone attending such a meeting as that which was raided had only himself to thank for any fate which overtook him. There had been an overcoat found in the lobby of the raided flat that contained a passport with an English name and a few papers which established the nationality of the owner. The polite gentleman thought the name was Mannering. He would inquire. I had accompanied Winson, went on Behrman, thinking I might be able to assist him as interpreter, but the fellow with the Baron could speak English as well as— "One moment, Dick," I said. "Had this man a red beard? Not Cosco, the other one." Dick Behrman looked his surprise at my question. "Why, yes, Sammy, a squarish affair of unholy colored hair. Do you know him?" "I think I do," I said, and apologized for my interruption. "Go on, there's a good fellow." Dick handed me over his cigarette case, and when we had lit up, "The man was not away long, and when he returned he had your passport with him. It was certainly yours. I remember you showed it to me the morning you were here. Otherwise, I might, perhaps, have suspected a forgery. I didn't like the eyes of the gentleman with the red beard. Besides, he was so damnably polite. He looked from me to Winston and back again with a smile that made me want to kick him. You will see, gentlemen, he said, and Dick mimicked the hateful purring voice of Felix Mazarov, that the case looks bad for your poor friend. He has evidently banded himself, is he not, with the enemies of Russia. You will understand that the authorities cannot discriminate. He went on to tell us of the regret that he, speaking for the government, felt that one belonging to such a friendly nation as the English, a people whom he personally so much admired, should have been so unfortunate. Perhaps, after all, Mr. Mannering was alive. He was afraid he could hold out little hope. If, happily, it was true, he would at once communicate with our ambassador. We might rest assured that all that could be done. You see, Sammy, that little affair at the flat was a big move of the government. There must have been a traitor in the camp somewhere. The police had been preparing the coup for days. They say that over 70 men and women lost their lives in the fight which took place. I can assure you that not only Winston, but I myself, believe that you were among those who were bundled underground, unhonored and unsung, the next morning. Winston, poor chap, was cut up, and I never saw a man more so. He hung about Moscow for a couple of weeks, hoping against hope. Then he went back to London. I guess he's wearing black for his friend to this day. He thought a lot of you, Sammy. I sat silent for a little while, when Dick had done speaking. There was a question on my tongue, the putting of which even the thought of Winston's grief could not postpone. And Myra Ramsay, what became of her? Dick took his cigarette from his lips and smiled. Haven't you learned your lesson yet? He asked. I did not return his smile, only leant across and laid a hand on his knees. Dick, that girl is more to me than all the world. I would go through 20 times what I have gone through if it would be of the least service to her. Perhaps you know the feeling? He saw that I was in dead earnest, for he dropped his bantering tone. Sorry I joked about it, Sammy, he said. Besides, I know you'll forgive me when I tell you that Myra Ramsay is, to the best of my knowledge, free. I saw her about 3 months ago in the streets here in Moscow. And the group to which she belonged, are they? Dick made an expressive gesture with his hands. Practically off the map, he said. The raid seemed to break them all up. There are a few left, but they are not strong enough to do any damage. Some got over the frontier, and are, I believe, in England. And you haven't seen Myra Ramsay since? No, it's 3 months as far as I can recollect, roughly. I think she must have gone home to England as well. I would have been sure to have seen her if she were still in Moscow. Now, look here, Sammy. There's razors and water and a bath in there. He pointed to where a door showed behind a curtain. We are as near as possible in build. I'll see that Olaf sends some clobber in to you. In a minute, I said. Now, how do I stand in the matter of the murder of Mr. Nevsky? Won't there be a shine about it? If I'm caught, it's no flowers by request for Samuel Mannering. Berriman snapped his fingers. I don't think somehow your friend Azanov will worry much. It wouldn't suit his book to have you found, and possibly cross-examined. You'd both suffer. No doubt he'll fake up some sort of description that will be as much like you as I'm like an Iroquois Indian, in order to throw dust in the government eyes. More likely, by now, he will have murdered some wandering peasant, perhaps the chap who took you to the station, and buried him in your name. I thought of the bedful of children I had seen, and hoped that, if victim there had been, it was not the man who had driven me through the night to the little wayside station. At 1 o'clock of the same day as that in which I re-established my connection with civilization across Berriman's breakfast table, I was seated in the Hermitage enjoying a most excellent lunch composed, with a fine disregard to my digestion, of the things which I had missed most during the time I had been the guest of the Russian government. I was well clothed, Dick having a pretty taste in raiment, and his garments having suited me admirably. I had trimmed up my straggling beard and moustache, and I had bathed. Never will I forget the clean comfort of that bath. The sensation is pigeon-holed in my mind in company with that I experienced when I lit my first cigarette in the 3rd house in the village. Freedom, good wine, music, the dresses of the women, all played their part in the coming to life of Sammy Mannering. Berriman had, heaven knows how and where, procured me a passport, and I was, for the moment, one Harold Ericsson, a fur merchant from Birmingham. This, together with the change in my appearance, eased my mind wonderfully as to what Azanov might do if he did see fit to play the Pharaoh and fetch me back. In fact, the events of the last few months were fast falling from me, leaving only a confused memory as of some hidden dream, leaving also a most burning desire to come to grips with Felix Merizef and to look again into the grey eyes of Myra Ramsay. I spent the afternoon walking about the city, rejoicing in my new-found sensations and feeling like some tourist beginning his holiday. I made a tour of the Kremlin, and, as it grew dark, took my way to the flat building where I had spent such an eventful evening 6 months previously. The place still showed signs of the rough usage it had experienced. The windows had been reglazed, but there were discoloured blotches where the stucco near the frames had been chipped away by the bullets of the police. The iron balconies, too, outside the windows, had not yet been repaired, and hung brokenly. Perhaps the authorities meant the damaged appearance of the place to be a salutary lesson to others, for they seemed to have been in no hurry to obliterate evidences of the fight. I walked round the corner and gave a casual glance up the little cul-de-sac where Myra and I had watched while the police brought in their dead. The thought of the girl's heroism gripped me as I looked, and again I seemed to see the pale face with its tendrils of damp hair, as it lay on its pillow of snow. Again I heard the sweet low voice as the girl had come out of her swoon to the desolation and distress around her. I was waiting now until it should grow darker, that I might put into practice a project I had had in my mind since I arrived in Moscow that morning. I meant to take an early opportunity of examining the broken piece of gutter pipe into which I had thrust the papers Myra Ramsay had taken from the bodies of the dead revolutionaries and thrown to me. They might prove useful in the work I had set myself, the task of tracing the girl and of presenting my account to Felix Merizef. In the fleeting glance I gave as I passed the mouth of the alley, it seemed that all was as it was on that night 6 months ago, except for the snow. There were the crates, or others like them, the barrels and the broken sleighs. My fingers itched to explore the piping, which I noticed still hung brokenly from the guttering. I spent the next hour sitting outside a café nearly opposite, drinking coffee and watching the passers-by. I had not long to wait until I deemed it dark enough for me to act. The street was a little frequented one, running, as it did, parallel to the main road, and there were but few people about. A gas lamp a few feet away threw its yellow light obliquely into the little yard, but this only had the effect of making the further end of it darker than ever. I saw that once I had gained an entry I would be able to work in perfect security. It was not likely that any of the few people passing by would disturb me by entering the cul-de-sac. I stood for a moment at the opening, lighting a cigarette and casting my eyes both up and down the street. Then, seeing I was unperceived, I slipped into the shadows. I wasted no time, but crossed to the corner and knelt down at the mouth of the pipe. My hands shook, and I told myself that my nerves were not yet what they used to be. There they were, a little sodden and discoloured by the rain and moisture which, in spite of its being disconnected with the gutter, had percolated through the pipe during the last 6 months. As I drew them out, those evidences of dead men and women, I saw again the whole scene, the snow, the shapeless masses of the bodies, and the blood-stained face of my little heroine. I think I saw every detail down to the fur toque that had lain on the ground. And then I hid the papers beneath my coat and regained the thoroughfare. End of chapter 15.